Hi everyone, happy Wednesday. I hope you guys are having a good hump day, and it is about that time. I knew that this talk about vaccines would have to come at some point, but I will be honest with you, I have kind of been dreading it. But I do know also that these videos help so many of you, and for that reason, I am going to go ahead and get uncomfortable and talk about these vaccines. The reason that I have been dreading it, to be quite honest with you, is that there are certain members of the anti-vax community who are just very, very ugly. Not just with their comments and their berating and their name calling, but also with the bullying and to the point of even making death threats against some of my pediatric colleagues. And this I absolutely won't tolerate. I am happy to talk and to discuss, to disagree. It is okay to be skeptical and to have questions, but I do not tolerate ugly, demeaning, berating, disrespectful comments. And for every single one of those that comes up, I will donate $10 to vaccine research. And quite honestly, if it gets so ugly that you use my face or my family's face as the ad for an anti-vax campaign, I will actually donate $500 to vaccine research. I want this to be an open forum. I want you to come with an open mind and with your questions. I want to be able to talk this out, but I don't think that we have to insult one another when we do this. And so, like I said, it means that you ask as many questions as you like. We are all here to learn. And for those of you who are scared, who are nervous, who are skeptical, hesitant, curious, and all of the above, I understand. I feel very much the same, and I hope that this video is useful to you as well. So first and foremost, I want to very basically explain what an mRNA vaccine is, as it is most likely that this is what is going to come across your way in the next several months. Now, you've all heard the term DNA. That's essentially our genetic code. And in our bodies, DNA is found in the very middle, which is called the nucleus, of all of our cells. And this is the way that our DNA then allows our cells to basically run how our entire bodies work. The DNA makes another type of protein called, or another type of genetic material called RNA. RNA then makes mRNA, and mRNA stands for messenger RNA. And messenger RNA is essentially the recipe for all of the different proteins in our body that make us function the way that we do. And so think of it like this. Our DNA is like a cookbook. mRNA is like a recipe in the cookbook. And the proteins that are made from the mRNA are like the amazing chocolate chip cookies that come from the recipe inside of the cookbook. Now, in January of 2020, which feels like a lifetime ago, scientists had already determined the genetic code for the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which is what causes COVID-19. And there is a specific protein on the SARS-CoV-2 virus called the spike protein. What the vaccine has done, what it has done is it has taken a synthetic copy of the mRNA, or the recipe for the spike protein. They've put it into a fat globule or a lipid capsule, which allows it to enter into our body safely so that it doesn't disintegrate, because mRNA on its own is very fragile, and then that's injected into the body. The lipid capsule lets it come into the cell, but it does not let it get into the nucleus of the cell where our own DNA is present. And this is very important because that is why our own DNA is protected. But again, it's been taken up into the cell, and it is outside of the nucleus, but inside of the cell. And then our cells see that recipe, and it uses its own ingredients to then make the protein, specifically the spike protein. But our bodies are very smart, and our bodies realize that this spike protein is not something that our own DNA has encoded for. And that's when our immune system wakes up and it says, this is foreign, we need to make antibodies to attack it, and we need to make other types of proteins to make sure that we killed this specific protein. And that's exactly what happens. So the spike protein itself does not make you sick. when you get the virus in your body and the virus is replicating, you get sick. But if the virus comes into your body and it has that spike protein on it, which it does, now with the vaccine in place, you already have antibodies and other immune-based proteins to attack that protein and basically attack the virus and get rid of it before it starts causing damage to your own body. And so at no point in time is active virus being injected into your body in the process of being given the vaccine. So this is really important to know about because 2 companies thus far have employed this new mRNA vaccine technology, Pfizer and Mrna. Again, probably terms you thought you would never know by memory way back in January of 2020, but this year is obviously very different. Now, Pfizer's study had 44,000 people in it, and Mrna's study had 30,000 people in it. And what's important is that both studies came up with incredibly similar results. 94 to 95% efficacy of the vaccine in preventing a COVID-19-like illness in participants who got the vaccine versus those who didn't. And the reason why it's so important to appreciate the fact that 2 different studies came up with these same conclusions is that they used the same technology, but they were independent of one another. They had their own methodology, and albeit similar, there were subtle differences in terms of numbers and demographics and things like that. And yet they produced reproducible data. This is when you can start to trust the science, when study after study is showing the same results. So now that you have the basics, let's talk about a few of the concerns that are out there about this virus, because I know, about this vaccine, because I know there's a lot. Number 1, and first and foremost, is that it's been rushed. People do not want new medicines or new vaccines that have been made at warp speed, and I fully understand that. This is by far the fastest vaccine that has ever been created. But do realize that the mRNA vaccine technology has been under study since 2005. It's just that now it had its opportunity to shine. And quite honestly, when you have essentially unlimited funds in the hands of vaccine scientists who already had the genetic code for SARS-CoV-2 back in January, things are actually going to operate at a warp speed. And rightfully so, because our entire country has been suffering for 10 months because of this virus. There is no reason to be taking half days when it comes to making this vaccine. We need to work and work and work until we get it right. And I do believe that that's what they've done thus far. Now, many vaccines have taken years and sometimes even 2 decades to come to fruition, but that's because someone had to front the cost of that research, knowing full well that sometimes research ends in a dead end, and nobody wants to give money away. And for these scientists, first they have to get enough money just to make the vaccine. And then they have to get enough money to show that it works in vitro or in a petri dish. And then they have to get enough money to show that it works in small animals and large animals. And then they have to get enough funding to show that they can move through phase 1 and then phase 2 and then phase 3 human trials. And this costs millions of dollars, and it takes time for the investigators to carry out each portion of these vaccine trials, show the results, and then ask for more money. But essentially, this time it was different. The funding and the incentive was already there, and that's why it was so much easier for these investigators and these investigators across the globe to do their job. And many of you will say, well, vaccine trials typically last 2 years, and you are absolutely right, they do. And this is to monitor for long-term side effects. And the current trials that are in place are absolutely planning to go forward for at least 2 years, if not longer. And while it would be nice to wait 2 years to have data like literally up to our ears, we don't have that kind of time to wait. We are literally losing 2,000 plus Americans a day. And our hospitals are filling up, and our ICUs are filling up, and quite honestly, we are all tired of this. We need a different solution than open up and lockdown, social distance, mask. We've been harping on these same things for months, and it's not working. So it's time to employ a different solution. In addition, it's important for you guys to know that with every other vaccine out there, 97% of severe adverse reactions occur within the first 6 weeks of giving the vaccine. And the minimum amount of data that we have on our subjects so far is 2 months, but for some of them, we already have 6 months. So we've completed that window of when 97% of bad stuff is going to happen, and we've extended 3 times as long as that in a large number of our subjects. And quite honestly, by the time many of you receive this vaccine, you're going to have several more months of data to act upon. Now, it's not to say that nothing can happen, but again, I do think those first 2 months are really when you want to focus on adverse events. And speaking of, you may have heard today that there were 2 individuals in the United Kingdom who had an allergic reaction to this Pfizer vaccine, because yesterday was the very first day that the country started vaccinating the elderly, as well as, I believe, some healthcare workers. Now, the media loves this and they want to jump on it because all of us are going to click on it because we're worried, right? But let me just tell you, the allergic reactions, as far as we know, did not happen immediately after the vaccine. In fact, they said that the allergic reactions happened early this morning, so several hours after the vaccine. Could it have been an allergic reaction? Absolutely. Could it have been an allergic reaction to something else? Again, possibly. These were individuals who were already allergic to things. Both of them, in fact, carried the British equivalent of an EpiPen. So it wasn't necessarily your average person who's not allergic to anything. These are individuals who are known to have allergies and then had some type of allergic reaction the next day. Both of them, fortunately, are doing well. And rather than just assuming, oh my gosh, this is a disaster, those are 2 individuals we want to study more. We want to learn what exactly happened and figure it out. But it should not raise panic because allergic reactions to vaccines are common. Allergic reactions to medications are common. Many of you watching are probably allergic to a certain antibiotic. It doesn't mean that that antibiotic shouldn't be available. It just means it's not the right antibiotic for you, and we have to find something else for you. So, issue number 2. The vaccine itself requires aborted fetal cell lines for production. For these 2 mRNA vaccines, this is incorrect. The vaccine itself is made up of synthetic genetic material, or mRNA, covered in a lipid or fat capsule, and it has no preservatives in it. Sorry, that was my phone ringing. There are no human or viral particles in the vaccine whatsoever. Now, was it tested in a fetal cell line prior to injecting it into a real-life human being? You bet it was, and appropriately so. The cell line was known as the HEK293 aborted related cell line. And this came from kidney cells from a fetus that was voluntarily aborted in 1973. And I'm not going to get into the politics of that with you, but do understand that this was in 1973 and has been the basis of so much research since then. So if there's any way that a cell line could give back, certainly this was it. And you absolutely need to know what reaction a human cell line will have to this type of new technology before conducting human trials, right? And this was our way to understand that. Number 3, the vaccine is going to change your own DNA or your own genetic material. And again, this is impossible. Your DNA is literally determined when your mother's egg and your father's sperm fertilize to create the zygote that ultimately became you. And whether it's been 10 years, 20 years, or 80 years since that time, your DNA has remained the same. Unless you have had a bone marrow transplant, then it might be a little bit different, but I'm not sure on that. We won't go into those details. In addition, your DNA lives in the nucleus, or that innermost part of the cell, which is very, very difficult to penetrate. And it's well protected because, why? Because our genetic code is there. So when that synthetic piece of mRNA is injected into your body, it's taken up by the cell, but it doesn't get into the nucleus. Your body uses its own ingredients to carry out the recipe and create the final product. It's kind of like going back to that analogy. If you printed out a recipe from the internet and you folded it in half and you put it into your favorite cookbook, you haven't changed the original form of the cookbook. You've just put a piece of paper in there. And if you dumped the cookbook upside down, the extra recipe would just fall right out. Number 4, this vaccine is going to create an autoimmune disease. We have no evidence of that whatsoever. And in fact, we have actually been seeing quite the opposite. It has been shown that COVID-19 infection, particularly in men, causes the body to create antibodies to certain inherent proteins within our immune system called interferons. Now, interferons help us fight infection, and yet COVID-19 has found a way to make our bodies attack our own interferon so that our own immune system is then not as strong to fight the virus. The spike protein, oops, sorry, I was getting lost. Oh yes, the spike protein is not part of, the mRNA for that is not part of our own genetic code. Our body will fight that and it will get rid of it. There is no self-attack in the process. Number 5, there are microchips in the vaccine. Again, this is incorrect. I've told you what the ingredients in the vaccine are. The microchips are actually in our phones, and the ones that we carry around with us all day long, we put next to our face when we sleep at night. We use 4 to 6 hours, and now they have that little green or orange dot when it's actually recording us that I can see is on my phone right now. Number 6, and this is one I do want to address for sure. The vaccine is going to make women sterile. And again, this is incorrect. In fact, there were 23 pregnancies that occurred during the Pfizer trial. 11 of those women were in the vaccinated arm. So they got vaccine 1, and then they found out that they were pregnant, and they got vaccine 2, and thus far we have had no issues. 12 of the women were in the placebo arm. And this has been a theory that has been circulating, and honestly, it has no evidence to support it. The argument behind the issue is that the spike protein that the vaccine allows us to make antibodies against is also part of placental development in mammals. And so if we create antibodies to the spike protein, the concern is that women may also be creating antibodies against their own placenta when they become pregnant, which would then cause them to miscarry. Now, if this was the case, we would have seen a lot more first trimester loss in pregnant women who contracted COVID-19. And couldn't you argue that every single woman who has contracted this novel coronavirus and its spike protein would also now be infertile? And again, we simply haven't seen this. What we have seen, unfortunately, are ICU admissions for pregnant women. We have seen preterm births, and we have seen even some maternal deaths, and that's what we want to stop. And this brings me to my next question or issue: pregnancy, breastfeeding, and the vaccine. So you may have heard that pregnant women, breastfeeding women, as well as a few other select populations, including children and immunocompromised individuals, were not included in the initial Pfizer vaccine or the Mrna vaccine. So we simply don't have the data right now to say how safe or effective it is in these populations. The FDA is reviewing this right now, and my suspicion is that they will not yet recommend the vaccine to all pregnant women. But many frontline workers who are pregnant are going to be willing to get the vaccine because they personally feel that the risk of COVID, because of their exposure level, outweighs the risk of the vaccine to them personally. And you might not feel as comfortable making that decision because you have a different exposure level. And again, that is 100% understandable. So for those of you who are pregnant, thinking about becoming pregnant, this is a discussion that you're going to want to have with your doctor. But I do think that you are going to start to see more and more favorable data in the next 6 months about this vaccine and its use in pregnant women. The same applies for breastfeeding women, but I will be honest with you. I think that with a breastfeeding woman, she creates antibodies all the time, and these antibodies are then transmitted to the baby through her breast milk. And quite honestly, the more antibodies you give that newborn who doesn't have much of an immune system on its own, the better. But this remains to be told, or truth to be told, I should say. In terms of kids, much of the same. Both of the companies are studying the vaccine in children 12 and above. And in fact, Pfizer is making the recommendation for kids 16 to 18 as well as adults 18 and older. But again, I think it's going to be several months before you see anything approved for children. it would be wonderful, quite honestly, to have this vaccine available for kids 12 and above before the start of the next school year. And again, I can understand your parental concerns about this. I talk to you guys about it on a regular basis, but this is where you're going to want to talk to your pediatrician as well. And I think one of the questions is, this virus doesn't seem to affect kids very much, so why do they even need it? And this is a very valid question, but do realize that, COVID-19 is not 100% harmless in children. Some children have died from it, and this sequelae of the virus, multisystem inflammatory syndrome in children, is a real phenomenon that we are learning more about and we are seeing. And I think more applicable to all children is that our kids need to be in school. I've been talking about this until I am blue in the face, but I want them in school. I want them to go to school 9 months out of the year and not do this in school, out of school, in school type of issue that they're having to deal with right now. But I want them to be able to do that and not be a health hazard to their classmates or their teachers. I think it is absolutely amazing what our teachers, our administrators, our school staff has done these past 9 months, but I think we can all agree that our kids deserve more than just distance learning. So what don't we know about this vaccine? Well, unfortunately, we don't know how long the immunity lasts. Studies show right now that at the 2-month mark, there is no sign of waning immunity, but again, we have to wait for more data. And we don't know if it's going to be like the flu shot. Do you have to take it every year? Or is it more like the measles or chickenpox shots? You get dose number 1, dose number 2, and then you are good. We'll just have to wait and see. We also don't know whether the vaccine protects against asymptomatic infection and whether or not you can still shed or transmit the virus once you have been vaccinated. So these are some very big questions. But again, I think we're going to learn more and more about that in the next 6 months. And last but not least, many of you have said, forget the lockdowns, forget the vaccine, forget all of it. Just let it rip and let this virus burn itself out. And I want to remind those folks that to date, there has literally never been a virus that has just burned itself out. The only viruses that we have truly eradicated from the planet include smallpox, polio, and at one point measles, and those were done by way of a vaccine. And then when we had small groups who stopped vaccinating against measles, that virus came back. So again, ultimately, this decision is going to be yours. And unfortunately, you are going to be inundated with information about this for weeks to come, well before the time that the vaccine may even be an option for you. But here is what I will tell you. COVID-19 infection is not just life or death. It's not as though you either have it and then you recover perfectly or you die. There is a gray space in the middle that is ugly, and it is filled with long-term issues. And you know why you lose your sense of smell when you have this infection. It's because the virus has literally gotten into your nervous system and in your brain, which is what allows you to smell. The virus itself also affects our blood vessels, our lungs, our heart, our liver, our kidney, our skin. And if you have not yet read about the long-termers, I would do so. The Wall Street Journal does a very nice recap of this. And let's not forget about the number of days lost off of work or school that this virus causes, as well as the amount of spread that happens that is now causing, again, 2,000 Americans to die every single day. So for me personally, I actually think it's a privilege to have access to one of modern medicine's greatest achievements thus far. But I know that for some of you, it's just not a slam dunk right now, and that's okay. But for those of you who are saying, nope, not going to get it, not now, not ever, it is your decision to make. But as more and more people get this vaccine and more data unfolds, I do urge you guys to have an open mind. Because the bottom line is, we as humans are not very good at social distancing for long periods of time. We are honestly not even very good at wearing our masks, and we are not good at eradicating viruses. We need another option to get our lives back to normal, and I think we may very well have found it, but it's not going to work unless, again, like a group effort, 70% of us become vaccinated. So that's just my 2 cents about this virus. I hope that you found this helpful, and I hope that you don't get too overwhelmed with all of the information that is coming your way. And until next time, have a great day, you guys.